Welcome to the WPL Book Drop Podcast. I'm your host, Seth, Library Assistant at Waterloo Public Library. I'm excited to welcome a great guest to the program today. Joining us is local historian Charles Pearson. Hi, Charles. How are we doing?
Hey, we're doing good, Seth.
Good. So, Charles, it's your first time on the show. Just to start out, could you just talk a little bit about who you are and kind of the general work that you do?
Yeah, so I'm a native of Waterloo, Iowa, born and raised, East High alum. Currently, I'm a historical resource consultant, and so what I basically do is assist people with different projects on their African American history. Currently, I'm trying to do more African American experiences associated with transportation.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's a little bit of what we're here to talk about today, because we've talked a little bit about that in the past when you've come into the library. You're first-time podcast host, frequent collaborator with the library.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know that transportation part has been a really, really big part of your research, and kind of how transportation, we'll get a little bit into that I think later, but how transportation kind of leads into tourism opportunities and why it's been so vital over the course of Waterloo's history. So since transportation is such a major focus of your research, could you just talk a little bit about what makes it such a vital aspect of our history, both locally and nationally to whatever extent?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the history of Waterloo, you're looking at the history of industrialization, right? And you're also looking at the history of railroad. So when it comes to African American history in the state of Iowa, railroad was that transportation resource that's our story. Then when you look at the history of the Great Migration, right, we part of that. So I want to say the Illinois Central Railroad was the Freedom Train at that time. And so if you were in the South, you had two choices. Either you could be a sharecropper or you work for the railroad. And so a lot of the history of the rail tells the history of other people. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear about, especially, with our role in kind of the Great Migration and how, that transportation huge role.
Industry, because there's such a rich history of industry in Waterloo, as everyone knows. The city has kind of lived and died by it over the years, and has been, our history has been kind of marked a lot.
People got to pay attention. If I was a tourist and I wanted to get experience Waterloo, Iowa, I would want to experience the industry. I would want to explore the factory city. Right? Because that's our story. But if the city has never developed that story and there's not a plan to do anything with it, then a lot of our legacy is going extinct like the dinosaurs.
So going off of that, you're doing the work kind of with the city and with different organizations right now on the Iowa Civil Rights Trail, or have done work on the Iowa Civil Rights Trail and the Waterloo's African American Historical Resource Development Project. And again, I know, which I touched on earlier, I know a lot of the goals in that work is to support local tourism, support local businesses. Support local businesses. I'll cut that part out. Support local businesses and to support local Black businesses as well in the Cedar Valley and in Waterloo. Can you speak to how your research and kind of the projects that you're working on will help kind of bolster that tourism and small businesses in Waterloo?
I think so. If you look at the state of Iowa and tourism, we're at the bottom as a state. So if you look at tourism throughout the United States of America, our whole state is not competing in that part. But then if you break it down and if you just look at travel and tourism within the state, Waterloo's at the bottom. Actually, if you want to take a bigger net, the county is at the bottom, right? So the whole thing is when it comes to travel and tourism, you're talking about how inclusive are cities and counties when it comes to travel and tourists to our state, right? And there's certain cities that stand out. So if you look at like Ames, 1.5 billion tourism dollars a year. Okay. Des Moines in the 2 billions, travel and tourism. And they're inclusive with their history. Look, Tri-Stadium, that's in Ames. Ames also has the Lincoln Byway Highway. Right? So they have Black history on their byway, right? So when it comes to the tourism industry, you can see the thriving cities in Iowa and the ones that are being inclusive when it comes to their tourists to visit.
Yeah, so kind of one of the kind of driving ideas then kind of that inclusion kind of begets more and more tourism value kind of.
Yeah, you have to, the city, so when you talk about tourists, if you come to Waterloo, Iowa, you'd be surprised how many people would pay money to get the German experience.
Yeah.
Right? So if there's places that people can explore and learn about German American history, they would come and do it, right?
Yeah.
Look at the 5 Sullivan brothers. We never really promoted Sullivan Park as a real tourist attraction or destination. And the sad part is, if you really know the history of the Sullivan family, their property and where they lived at was the real red line. So when you talk about urban renewal in Waterloo, Iowa, it really was the Sullivan family and the Irish and German community that lost everything. You had black property owners that lost some properties too, but can you imagine the Sullivan family lost everything because of redlining? Wow. And we've never had that conversation.
Wow, yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah, and yeah, definitely one of the bigger parts of or one of the more recognized parts of Waterloo history.
It's our breadwinner.
Yeah.
So when it comes to travel and tourism, the city and county has invested millions in the legacy of the Sullivan family, and they haven't gotten the legacy right. Right? So Tom Sullivan, he basically asked the city right before he died, a few years before he died, he said, "City, look, can you save our house and turn it into a museum?"
Wow. Interesting.
Right? Yeah. So the whole thing is, when it comes to travel and tourism opportunities, if we don't take, really it's the history of the poor people. So if you don't take the history of the poor people and make it inclusive to the downtown and what they're doing in tourism, or make it competitive, like what they're doing in Iowa City and these other cities, then we're just, I don't know, just boring.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, well, I'm really glad that work is happening then to kind of bolster that tourism and kind of highlight those spots that I think people would be really, really interested to learn more about. Definitely. And going off of that and going off of kind of stuff happening in downtown Waterloo, you'll be here on February 13th at 5:30 p.m. up in our conference room. If you're watching the video, just up on the second floor, near where we are. You'll be here to give a talk kind of about some of the research that you've done in the cultural tourism sphere and in the civil rights sphere as well. Can you touch, and again, I'm sure we've touched a little bit already on kind of what you'll talk about there, but can you just talk a little bit about what people can expect on February 13th here at the library? Yeah,
I think what works for me is we did these great projects that never got used again.
Gotcha.
Right? So we designed, matter of fact, we designed this trail to launch specifically for the state of Iowa. So we saying, Waterloo, you're the launching pad for the state trail system. Specifically because Martin Luther King's first visit to Iowa was Waterloo, and the lady that brought him was an East High alumni.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. So the whole thing with the city was the backer of the whole thing. You know, they were the face of it. And so it's kind of like after COVID and some other things, it's kind of like the whole Iowa Civil Rights Trail Project lost its legs in Waterloo, which it should have never have, because everything is documented. You had students do it. It wasn't the city did the work. You had high school students that did the work. And so to me, to re-educate people about that initiative, I think that'll bring some energy. I think, but two, how do you connect Black Waterloo to the downtown cultural corridors, right? So the Black community, one, hasn't been identified yet. So we still have to where the hell is the Black community at? right? We haven't identified it yet. The city has to map it, right? And so once they identify it and map it, now the historical black families and the business community, now they could be part of that tourism connection that's already established in downtown Waterloo.
So again, kind of going into how just broader inclusion and it's kind of
right. It's just being included. It's like saying it's like even like this project we did in Cedar Falls. People don't even know about this project.
Oh yeah, worked on by Jim O'Loughlin.
Yeah.
And with Charles's help, of course. Yeah, I know that.
Or we could flip it. It started by Charles. Originally, this is what it was. I just ain't never showed people this. Originally, this was the project.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But the mayor, he didn't want to me to have that much control of the project, because what this project, when you talk about Eddie with this project, you're talking about a black man that lived off the river.
Yeah.
If you talk about Eddie in this project, you're talking about Eddie and this blues legend, right?
Yeah.
And the sad part is he was the first employee of the city. So the first black employee of the city of Cedar Falls lived in a shack in the woods off the Cedar River for 40 years. But y'all don't want people to know that. But y'all want them to know this. And then look, visit downtown Cedar Falls and learn about. So the whole thing is, what we don't do, or what I don't do, is get caught up in what other people's projects are.
Yeah.
Right? And so one of the things we have to know as a community, these things are real. These projects aren't like artificial.
Yeah.
The problem is the leadership that's supposed to get you connected to these types of initiatives. You have bad leadership.
Gotcha.
So when it comes to travel and tourism, Waterloo is like 300 million. We still in the millions when it comes to travel and tourism. Like what we were saying, how do we take our history and culture and make that the driver of Waterloo being the factory city?
Yeah, kind of again, bringing that industrial history as kind of
that's our history.
Yeah.
Right? But you can't what people have to pay attention to is really the history of the white poor people has been carved out.
Interesting.
Right. So if you were the Warren family, Warren Transport, that's probably the best example I could give you. Poor as hell, Irish family, lived on the east side. The Warrens end up working out a deal with John Deere's, and now they're wealthy.
Interesting. Wow.
One of the Warrens ends up marrying a Nilsson. So Donna Warren, who was Donna Nilsson, with Nilsson Properties, born and raised, her and her husband born and raised on that same side of town that the Sullivans were.
Gotcha. Wow.
You didn't even have black people. People got to understand, Waterloo didn't have black people on the poor side of town until after the turn of the 20th century.
Interesting.
So you're talking about from the 1850s until about 1911, you just had poor immigrants over there.
Gotcha. Interesting. Wow. Well, thank you, Charles, for talking about all your really interesting research and giving us a kind of preview of what to expect on the 13th and kind of what we'll talk about, and Waterloo's really rich, interesting history. Before we go, we always end the episode with 2 recommendations from both the host and the guest. It's gonna be book recommendations, movie recommendations, TV show. I've never done music recommendations, I suppose, too. I'll go ahead and start just to break the ice, but so my 2 books today are, my first one will be one that was kind of a reread, I guess. Hanif Abdurraqib's book, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, was recently re-released. And I honestly don't even remember what exactly was added in the re-release. I think it was like annotations and something, but that was otherwise, I believe, a 2016 release. It's an essay collection by Hanif Abdurraqib, who is also a poet, also used to be, it still is, but in a lesser capacity, I think, a music writer with like MTV, other magazines and outlets and stuff like that. But he writes a lot about pop culture and sports and things like that, but writes in a very, he's a poet by, he's also a poet, so there's a lot of like just really, really beautiful language in there, and kind of talking about things that I think sometimes we take for granted in our day-to-day lives, those pop cultural aspects, sports, and everything like that, and really brings a gravity to them, I think. The second I have, I forgot to write it down. Chrome Valley by Mahogany Brown, which is a poetry collection that came out last year, which was the last book I read of 2023. I've still not gotten my first book of 2024 in yet. I've been a very bad librarian by not doing that yet this year. But I finished that up towards the end of last year and just really, really loved it. Mahogany Brown is just has such a really, really rich command of language, and is just so good at just everything she does. Every poem is just, there's not a word wasted. Can't say enough about that. Both are books we have here at the library if you wanted to come check them out. But those are my two recommendations. Charles, do you have a couple for us?
I would say with Black History Month coming around the corner, there's a book called Outside In.
Gotcha.
And I think y'all might even have it in the library. And so if there's any students or any people that just want to get a grasp of different families and different small businesses that existed all over the state, but if they want to zoom in just on Waterloo, I recommend Outside In.
Gotcha. Do you remember the name of the author?
I can't remember the name of the author though, right.
That's okay. I'll find it. We'll get that in the link for that episode.
Man, shame on me. I should have wrote that down. And then I'm locking in on this movie. It's called The Green Book. And did you see The Green Book?
Gotcha. Yeah, it's been a bit. Well, because that won the Oscar, I think, in 2018 or so. Yeah, I don't think I've watched it since then. But.
Yeah, well, I got to rewatch it because we have an opportunity. Waterloo was one of the locations in The Green Book.
Oh, interesting. I don't think I remember that.
And so, no, it wasn't in the movie.
Gotcha. Okay.
But it was like in the Green Books. Yeah. And so what we were looking at was how to introduce kids to the Green Book whole finale, and then narrow down Waterloo's piece in that. Yeah. So that would be a movie I would suggest.
Yeah, bringing those kind of cultural tie-ins, I think is really, really interesting, and I think people really love seeing that. That's really cool. Awesome. Well, I think that brings us to the end here today. Charles, thanks again for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you.
Of course. It's been a pleasure. Anything else you want to say at the end here?
No, I think I appreciate all the stuff that the library is doing. And I'm a big backer of what you're doing, and thank you guys for these platforms.
Yeah, this is a good time to say I apologize if anyone heard any pounding. They're actually putting in a new wall over in our teen zone to have a little bit of just kind of separation between those public computers and kind of where some of our younger patrons play video games and all that, and it could get a little bit noisy sometimes. So we're just putting in some separation there, nice big glass wall. Of course, we have the youth department that's getting worked on that will hopefully be good to go and ready sometime this spring. Thanks again, Charles. That's all I have for today. So thanks for listening. If you like today's episode, feel free to like and subscribe either to the podcast or to the city's YouTube channel, depending on where you're watching it or listening, I should say, I guess. But otherwise, hope you all have a great week whenever this gets released.